Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, Director and Consultant here at Boomer Consulting, and with me today is Marc Staut. Marc is our Chief Information and Technology Officer. Actually, that's wrong. It's Chief Innovation and Technology Officer, which is actually really relevant for our conversation today. So Marc, welcome. Thanks for being here. Before we dive into the conversation, just to give the listeners a little context for who you are, please share with us how you spend your day-to-day, week-to-week here at Boomer and some of your experience prior to Boomer.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on again, Jon. I really appreciate it. So my background, I've been serving the profession for more than 20 years now, which still freaks me out every time I have to say that. And I honestly don't want to do the math at how many more than 20 years at this point. It's starting to add up in ways that I'm just not comfortable with. But prior to joining Boomer, I was a partner and CIO in a top 10 firm. And I'd actually helped that firm grow from a fairly small firm of only about 250 people to well over 3,000 people by the time that I left. So seen a lot, had a lot of experiences, and really enjoyed helping the firm grow and be strategic. My area that I was focused on was technology, but what I found was that technology is about so much more than just the technical things that are there. It's not just the shiny objects, it's not just the computers. It's really about making sure that you are looking for a competitive advantage. And so I found myself focused a lot on the business strategy as well as the technology strategy. And when my time with the firm was done, I knew that's what I wanted to keep doing going forward. And Boomer Consulting, where I've been for about 4 years now, has really given me the opportunity to do that. So I spend my days talking to people, listening to what they're doing, giving them some of the lessons that I've learned, and also hearing some of the things that they've learned. Rolling all of that together into a way of approaching the different knowledge that is out there, so that we can apply that to their firm and their specific circumstances, because every firm really is unique and different, but there are commonalities. And if we can help people avoid some of the pitfalls that everyone else has fallen into, or even a few people have fallen into, then they can go further faster by leveraging the Boomer advantage.
That is great, Marc. And you've been in the trenches, so you know exactly what it's like to live in that world. And that kind of tees up the conversation today, which is all about developing a process around innovation. So your title, right, brings together technology and innovation. And that's not just happening in your title, that's happening in the profession as a whole.
Absolutely.
So the first question I want to tee up for you, Marc, is why is it important for firms to have a process around innovation?
Yeah, and I love the way you phrased the question, Jon. You didn't ask, why is it important for firms to innovate? What you asked was, why is it important to have a process around innovation? And that's the first focus that firms should really dive into is, do we have a process around innovation? Or, as most people think, is it a bunch of people sitting in a room thinking and writing down ideas on a whiteboard or sketching out, different drawings and trying to map things out? No, the way that innovation works the best is if there really is a process. And the process is designed to do several different things. First and foremost, it's to make sure that innovation is happening in the firm at every level. So it has to really be supported by a culture of innovation where people can come up with ideas, no matter what level they are, no matter what role they're in, that could be beneficial to the firm. And they may be, $1 million ideas, or they may be $1,000 ideas in savings or time or efficiency. But what do you do with all of these ideas? How do you actually figure out which ones should boil up to the top and which ones should get the focus and the resources and everything else? And which ones, are like, well, that's a good idea, but maybe now's not the right time for that. So the process is designed to clarify and allow people to enter the innovation process at any different point and from any different level.
That's great. And I love how you're stressing the all levels, right? Sometimes in organizations, you can think innovation automatically and only happens at the top.
Yep.
And that is just simply not true. Some of the best ideas in firms that we see happening today are coming from all throughout the organization, not just at the top. So, all right, we know why it's important to have a process around innovation now, right? So, what kind of recommendations or solutions would you have for a firm that is interested in creating that process?
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways to really go about it. And the first thing to do is come up with an action plan to sit down and strategize about how are we going to do this? What is it that we want to accomplish? What are some of our big goals? But defining that plan, don't just leave it fuzzy. Wow, we need to be more innovative isn't going to get you the results that you're really looking for. So putting some definition around that plan. The next thing that I would recommend is really investing in an innovation team. That could be a committee, that could be a team. Different firms call it different things. It could be the firm of the future. It could be the innovation advancement committee. But it's essentially a team of people who are brought together to really be champions for innovation within the firm. And once you have that, then they can start to create the right environment. And I mentioned building a culture of innovation. And that's so important in enabling people to do that. And you do that by following a couple of other steps, which is really setting up feedback loops. Once you start asking people for their ideas, the worst thing that you can do is make them feel like their idea fell on deaf ears, right? Even if that idea is not going to go forward, it still needs to be appreciated that they sent it in. It still needs to be recognized that there was some consideration. And even if the idea doesn't move forward, letting the person know why or how, or maybe that the timing just isn't right, are all really important. So setting up those feedback loops, and then that's going to inspire people to ideate or to come up with ideas. And they will literally sit down and put on their thinking caps about, how can I make a difference? And it's amazing when you inspire people to do that, how many great ideas feels like they're coming out of the woodwork. And then one final thing, once you do that, you have to make sure to recognize who those innovators are. Whether it's a acknowledgement, an email that goes out, whether it's an award or maybe a bonus, but making sure that people are recognized for those innovations, that will continue to build that culture of innovation and inspire people to come up with new ideas.
That's great, Mark. And I know you lead our efforts internally here at Boomer, so we are continually innovating. You also help firms in this area. And one thing I hear you talk about often is the importance of innovation happening both externally for maybe new services or for client work, and also internally. Would you mind speaking to that a little bit, kind of your advice to firms to think about both internal and external innovation?
Yeah, that's a big one, right? Because to really have that recipe for innovation, you can't be focused on, oh, I just want that $1 million idea.
Mm-hmm.
There are multiple types of innovation, and some of it is really improving the efficiency of a process that already exists. Some of it is doing the same thing but a different, better way. Some of it is doing something completely differently to generate better results. And then, of course, you have the ones that everybody thinks about, the breakthrough innovations, the kind of the skunk works of, wow, nobody thought about this, we're going to go do this. Or what most people think of when they hear innovation is also that disruptive innovation. Hey, we want to be the next Uber. Okay, well, that's a whole lot of disruption there that takes a whole bunch of different circumstances. So if you're only judging by whether you came up with a disruptive idea that puts everybody else out of business, that's kind of a tough recipe. So think about how you can apply innovation in your firm and make things better and start to fine tune the processes on a regular basis. So that continuous improvement.
That's great. And sometimes we hear firms that when they are focusing on that internal innovation, they realize there's a market for that, and they end up delivering that externally to clients, of theirs as well. So it's interesting that, to hear you talk about the relationship between the internal innovation and the external innovation, and why both are so important. So,
John, real quick on that, there's so many examples, especially when you look at innovation and technology right now. I hear the stories all the time of firms that are looking into RPA, or robotic process automation, and they're trying to improve processes inside their own firm. And so they'll automate things that are redundant, that are repetitive, that people don't really want to do. And then they start talking about what they've done to their clients, and the clients are like, wow, that's amazing. Can you come in and do that for us? And boom, new service line. And that is happening in firms across the country right now.
Yep, that is great, Mark. So we talked about why a process for innovation is important. We've talked about some of the recommendations and solutions you have and you recommend to firms as you are working with them, as you are leading us internally here. So if the listeners are thinking, all right, I'm bought into the why, I get some of those recommendations and solutions, what kind of results can I expect if my firm starts doing that? Would you mind sharing some of the results you've seen?
Yeah, so I just mentioned one of the ones with RPA, where new service lines kind of come out of, it feels like thin air sometimes. But it's not just that. It's really the ability to continuously improve and build those efficiencies. And when we're in a competitive environment like we are in, and most firms are in, where they're looking to maximize their resources, then innovation is a great way to get more out of what you're already doing. How can we use what we already have to better effect? How can we go and get the right things and make sure that we're doing the right things to move things forward? So you may see things like efficiency gains. You may see things like time savings. There may be new opportunities in service lines and new revenue opportunities, or you may find that you need less people to do the same work, which means that you can take those people and upskill them into doing other things that also drive revenue. So there's a bit of a cascading effect when you start to say, hey, let's take an honest look at what's going on. And that's a big part of it, is having the courage to be collaborative and inclusive and include everybody's ideas as potentially having value. And then the other thing is, you also have to have that tolerance for risk and failure, and be willing to try things, because that's where some of the best ideas come from, is those, I hate to say it, but those outside the box thinkers.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you mentioned upskilling, right? And I think that's something, we see as we do work with firms on this, is the types of ideas that are being submitted and the individuals that are submitting those ideas within your company, within your firm. You often start to see that they have skill sets that are actually being unused at the firm. Yep. Right? And so it does create opportunities for people to lead in new ways. If it does create opportunities for upskilling as well, that's fantastic. But those are some of the indirect benefits you've talked about before of having this innovation process in place. So, Mark, I know you read a lot. I know you always pay attention to what's going on in professions that are outside the accounting profession, whether they are tangentially related or not. You seem to be knowledgeable and aware of what's going on outside the accounting profession and how might it influence our profession. So if you think about this topic of innovation and developing a process around it, how do you see this topic applying to other professions?
Yeah, everybody's trying to get an advantage, right? I've mentioned a competitive advantage a couple of different times, and every business is out there doing that. But the ones that are, again, looking for those moonshots, those are kind of one in a million, right? It's like winning the lottery. But there's other types of innovation that are out there. There's what's called sustaining and research innovation. And the sustaining innovations are, how do we improve what we've already got? How do we take our product and bump it up a level? How do we take our services and bump it up just a notch, one notch at a time? until we're the ones who are setting the bar. And the research innovation is just as important, but oftentimes overlooked. And that's where you look at some of the emerging technologies or those accelerating technologies that are out there, whether it be a blockchain or an artificial intelligence or something like that, and look for what other businesses are doing. How are they looking to use these technologies? We recently did that at Boomer Consulting when we put on our annual summit. Instead of just being status quo with the platform that many other people were using, whether it be Zoom or a more traditional virtual conferencing platform, we're like, well, wait a minute, what are other people doing? And we found a platform that was in the education space that had been used. And we're like, yeah, this is actually a better fit for us. And we don't see anybody who is doing it in our profession. So thinking about how other businesses are doing, and honestly, keeping your eyes open and always looking for that research aspect of innovation, that's where I would tell firms to focus on and say, hey, find businesses, find models that you admire, and then watch what they're doing and ways that they're innovating, and ask yourself, is there something like that we can do?
That's really great. And that's starting to get into kind of my final question for you, Marc, is, we have listeners here or, viewers watching this, and hopefully they're pumped up about the topic of innovation in their organization. So, you can't implement something like this overnight. It takes some time, but what's the one action, the one next step you could leave our listeners with?
I would tell them to build a team. Start building your innovation team, and you've got to have those people who aren't afraid to think out of the box, to do things differently, because they don't want to just do the same thing because that's the way it's always been done. They have to be willing to challenge the status quo. You want them to be client facing. You want them to really be people who can impact the clients in the business as well, but also be internal facing so that you get those internal innovations. And then the one thing that I recommend when you're building a team is think about the people that you're going to invite, and don't invite people who don't have 10 years or more of career runway left. Think about really investing in that next generation or those future leaders, because they're the ones who are going to want to make the investment in innovation that is going to pay off in the long-term strategic game.
That is really insightful. And I will be honest with you, when you started to say 10 years of, most of our listeners may be thinking experience, but it was no, runway left. And I think that is a real important takeaway.
Yep.
So Marc, I could probably ask you 5-10 more questions on this topic because it's such an interesting one, and it's such an important one to the success and growth of our profession as a whole. But I want to thank you for giving us the time, joining us. I know you're extremely busy, giving us the time and joining us just to briefly talk about this topic. So thank you, Marc.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me.
And for everyone listening, thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks so much.